The waitress never argued, never complained, never asked for anything, just carried her tray and did her job and let the cruelty wash past her like it was nothing. But here's what nobody in that restaurant understood. She wasn't enduring it. She was documenting it. And when she was ready, not one person in that room was prepared for what came next. This story will make you question every person you have ever looked down on and make you realize that everyone who has ever looked down on you deserved what was coming to them. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because this one will stay with you long after it ends. The laughter came first. It was the kind of laughter that did not need a microphone. It filled every corner of the Golden Fork restaurant like water rushing into a room with no exits. High, sharp, and deliberately loud. The kind of laughter designed not to express joy, but to cause pain. Oh my goodness. Stephanie Holt pressed one manicure hand to her chest, her diamond bracelet catching the afternoon light like a camera flash. She was pointing. Actually pointing, one long finger aimed across the dining floor at the woman carrying a tray of water glasses toward table 9. Look at her. Just look. Her two friends, Gabby Walsh and Trina Foss, turned. They looked. And they did exactly what Stephanie wanted them to do. They laughed too. The woman they were laughing at was tall, dark-skinned, and full-figured. She wore the restaurant's standard uniform, a plain black blouse, dark trousers, non-slip shoes that had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun. No jewelry, no makeup to speak of. She walked with steady, unhurried steps, the tray perfectly balanced in one hand, her eyes focused on the table ahead. Her name tag read, Diane. How's she even fit behind the counter? Stephanie said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One older gentleman put down his fork. Honestly, management should have a size requirement. For the customer's sake. Gabby snorted. Trina tried to look less delighted than she was. Diane set the water glasses down at table 9 with practiced precision. She did not hurry. She did not look toward the sound of the laughter. She straightened up, tucked the now empty tray under her arm, and turned back toward the kitchen. That was when Stephanie called out to her. Hey, waitress. Waitress. She snapped her fingers twice. We need menus. And maybe bring something for yourself too, some kind of salad or something. A big one. More laughter. Gabby covered her mouth. Trina looked at the ceiling. Diane walked to the table. She reached into the pocket of her apron and produced 3 laminated menus, which she set in front of each woman without a word. You know, it's actually kind of incredible, Stephanie continued, studying her menu without looking up. You carry that tray so well. Must be all the you know. She made a vague circular gesture with her hand. Extra weight. Built-in balance. Diane stood and waited. Her expression did not change. I'll have the Caesar salad with grilled chicken. Light dressing, no croutons. Stephanie snapped the menu shut and held it out without looking up. And try not to forget anything. I know it can be hard to focus when you're tired. Diane took the menu. I'll have your order out shortly. Her voice was calm. Not the strained calm of someone holding back tears. The genuine, settled calm of someone who is simply unbothered. That, somehow, irritated Stephanie more than anything else could have. She doesn't even react, Stephanie muttered to Gabby as Diane walked away. That's the problem with people like that. No self-awareness. Gabby nodded. Trina played with her water glass. What none of them noticed, what no one in that restaurant noticed, was the young woman sitting alone at a corner table near the window. She was perhaps 19 or 20, with the same dark skin as Diane, the same steady eyes. She was curvy, soft-faced, and dressed in a simple white blouse and jeans. She had a notebook open in front of her and a cup of tea going cold beside it. Her name was Brianna Wells, and she had heard every word. Brianna did not cry. She closed her notebook slowly, capped her pen, and watched her mother move back toward the kitchen. The same unhurried walk, the same straight back, the same quiet dignity that Brianna had watched her whole life and never fully understood until recently. She was beginning to understand it now. It had started 3 weeks ago when Diane told her. Not with documents or presentations or formal announcements. Just the two of them sitting in the kitchen of their modest apartment, mugs of tea on the table between them, and Diane saying, simply, "I need you to see what I see. So I'm going to show you. But you have to see it from where I stand first." Brianna had not known what that meant. Not entirely. Not yet. What she knew was this. Her mother, Diane Wells, the woman currently taking Stephanie Holt's Caesar salad order in a black blouse and worn-out shoes, was not who most people thought she was. Brianna picked up her pen and wrote one line in her notebook. She sees everything. Stephanie Holt was not an unremarkable person. That was part of the problem. She was the only daughter of Gerald and Miriam Holt, owners of Holt Property Group, one of the most successful commercial real estate firms in the city. She had grown up in a house with 7 bedrooms and a staff of 4. She had been told, at every stage of her life, that she was exceptional. Her mother had said it. Her father had said it. Her teachers, most of them afraid of her parents' influence on the school board, had said it too. By 26, Stephanie had never been told no by anyone who mattered. She had, however, gotten very good at identifying people she believed did not matter. Diane Wells, as far as Stephanie was concerned, was one of those people. A middle-aged black woman working as a waitress at a mid-range restaurant. What power could she possibly have? What consequence could she possibly carry? Stephanie had eaten at the Golden Fork 3 times in the last 2 weeks. Each time, she had found new ways to make Diane's shift uncomfortable. A complaint about slow service. A remark about the portion size clearly not being a problem for someone like her. A tip left at 37 cents, exactly, with a small note that read "Diet starts Monday" written on the receipt. She had not expected Diane to respond to any of it. She had especially not expected what happened the following Thursday. Stephanie arrived at the Golden Fork with her mother, Miriam Holt, for their weekly lunch. Miriam was a sharp-faced woman in her 50s, dressed in a cream blazer and pearls, with the kind of posture that came from decades of wanting people to know she had money. They were seated. Stephanie looked around for Diane. "She's here," she murmured to her mother with a small smile. "The big, fat waitress I told you about. Watch how she walks. It's almost impressive, actually, like a ship, like a fat cow." Miriam adjusted her pearls. "Stephanie, don't be cruel." "I'm not being cruel. I'm being descriptive." Diane appeared from the kitchen, tray in hand, moving toward a table across the room. She had not yet seen Stephanie and Miriam. She was delivering a full breakfast spread to a table of 3 businessmen in expensive suits, men who, by their posture alone, were important. One of the men looked up when Diane set his plate down, and he said something. Diane leaned slightly closer, listened, and then said something back. The man laughed, a genuine laugh, surprised and pleased, and nodded. The other 2 men looked at Diane with new attention. Stephanie watched this, frowning slightly. Then Diane turned and saw Stephanie and Miriam. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Diane's expression. Not surprise, not irritation. More like recognition. Like she had been waiting for this particular Thursday. She walked over, produced 2 menus, and set them on the table. "Good morning. Welcome back." She said it to Stephanie, but her eyes, briefly, calmly, moved to Miriam. Miriam's hand, which had been reaching for the menu, slowed. She looked at Diane. Diane looked at her. Something passed between them that Stephanie did not catch, did not know to look for, and could not have translated even if she had seen it. "Thank you," Miriam said. Her voice had gone slightly different. Quieter. "I'll give you a moment to decide," Diane said and walked away. Stephanie was already looking at the menu. "Told you she was something to see. Like what's the word, a barge. Very confident for a woman in that." "Stephanie." Miriam's voice was low and sharp. "Stop." Stephanie looked up. Her mother's face was a color she did not recognize. "What?" Miriam was staring at the space Diane had just left. Her pearls rose and fell with a slow breath. "Do you know who that woman is?" Stephanie rolled her eyes. "A waitress. That's my point. She walks around like she owns." "Stop talking." Miriam set the menu down. Her hands were not entirely steady. "Stop." Talking. Stephanie stared. In 26 years, she had never heard her mother use that voice with her. Not once.
Mom.
What is going on? Miriam did not answer right away. She was watching Diane, who had stopped at another table, was listening to a customer with that same quiet attention, was nodding once and writing something in her small notepad. That woman, Miriam said slowly, is Diane Wells.
Yes.
I know. It's on her. Diane Wells, Miriam said again, as if the repetition was necessary, as if the name needed to land twice to mean what it meant, is the founder and silent owner of Wellspring Capital Group. The word sat there. Stephanie blinked. Wellspring is that's an investment firm. They own half the commercial properties in this district. They're the parent company of, she stopped. A cold, creeping feeling started at the back of her neck. Dad's biggest client. Holt Property Group's biggest client for the last 4 years is Wellspring Capital Group. Miriam closed her eyes briefly. Yes. Stephanie turned and looked at Diane, who was now laughing softly at something the customer had said. Diane in her worn shoes and her plain blouse and her hair in a simple bun, and felt the floor do something it had never done to her before. It did not shake. It did not crack. It simply reminded her that it was very, very far below her feet. Brianna saw the moment happen. She had been watching from her corner table, notebook closed now, tea abandoned, eyes on her mother the way a person watches something they know is about to become a memory. She saw Stephanie's face change. She saw Miriam Holt's hand go still on the table. She saw her mother move through the restaurant with the same steady grace she always had, touching nothing, disturbing nothing, and yet somehow rearranging everything in every room she entered without anyone realizing it was happening. Brianna had spent 19 years being embarrassed by her mother's ordinariness. The worn shoes, the practical clothes, the way Diane never corrected people who underestimated her, never raised her voice, never needed anyone to know what she was. She understood it now. Or, she was beginning to. She was not finished understanding. That was what her mother had said. You're not finished yet. Not in a discouraging way. The way a teacher says it about a student they believe in completely. Brianna's phone lit up on the table. A message from a number she had saved as Real Dad. Do not call back yet.
She looked at it.
Her chest did something complicated. She turned the phone face down without opening the message. That was another thing she was not finished understanding. Her mother had told her 2 weeks ago, same kitchen table, same mugs of tea, that her father was alive. That he had been looking for them. That he was, and here Diane had paused in a way that Brianna had never seen her pause before, had set down her mug and taken a breath, and chosen her next words with a kind of care that made Brianna's own breath slow, that he was someone with a great deal of power in a world that Diane had worked very hard to keep Brianna away from. What kind of power? Brianna had asked. Diane had looked at her for a long moment. The kind that requires you to be very sure of who you are before you meet it, she had said. That's why we're here. In this restaurant. In these shoes. That's why you need to see what I see before you see anything else. Brianna had not understood that either. Not fully. On the other side of the restaurant, Stephanie Holt was staring at her mother with an expression Brianna recognized, the expression of a person whose understanding of the world had just been quietly, firmly, and permanently corrected. Brianna picked up her notebook and wrote another line. She's been teaching me this whole time. The week that followed was the longest of Stephanie Holt's recent life. She did not return to the Golden Fork. She sat instead in her father's home office, a room she rarely entered because it smelled of old paper and concentrated stress, and watched Gerald Holt read a 2-page document with the focused expression of a man diffusing something explosive. When he finished, he set it down. He looked at his daughter. Tell me again, he said. Exactly what you said to her. And how many times? Stephanie told him. She kept her voice even, her chin up, her hands still in her lap, the way her mother had taught her to sit when she was in trouble and wanted to appear as though she was not. Gerald Holt listened without interruption. When she finished, the room was quiet for a while. Wellspring Capital Group, he said, is responsible for 43% of our current revenue. Their renewal contract is due in 6 weeks. He picked up a pen, turned it once between his fingers, and put it down. Diane Wells has, at last count, declined 7 acquisition offers from firms larger than ours. She has never had a public profile. She has never done a single interview. She has been operating, for 11 years, as the most powerful silent investor in the city, and nobody outside of a very small circle knows her face. He looked at his daughter steadily. Until you made sure that everyone in that restaurant knew her name was on a waitress uniform. Stephanie said nothing. Stephanie. Her father's voice did not rise. It never rose. That was somehow worse. Do you understand what it means when someone of that level of power chooses to be invisible? Do you understand what it means that she was in that restaurant, in that uniform, without anyone knowing? I didn't know. You treated a human being as though her value was printed on her clothes. Gerald Holt stood up. And in this specific case, it has put 11 years of business at serious risk. But I want you to understand that even if she had been exactly what you thought she was, even if she had been nothing more than a woman doing an honest job, what you did would still be a problem. In our family, under our name. He left the room. Stephanie sat alone for a long time. She picked up her phone and looked at the photo she had taken of the restaurant 3 visits ago, a candid, sneaky shot she had sent to Gabby with the caption "The fat ship has arrived, LOL." She had thought it was funny. She had sent it without thinking, the way she did most things.
She deleted it now.
Then sat wondering if deleting it was too little and too late, which it almost certainly was. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that Diane Wells had already seen that photo. Had seen it within 40 minutes of it being sent. Had looked at it for a long moment, set her phone face down on the kitchen counter, and then gone back to washing dishes with the same even, rhythmic calm she brought to every task. She had not been surprised. She had been waiting. Brianna was running out of excuses to stay in the restaurant every day. She had ordered more tea than she had ever wanted in her life. She had eaten breakfast, lunch, and one very unnecessary second lunch. She had filled 2 notebooks with observations she was not entirely sure she understood yet. But her mother had asked her to be here, and she was beginning to see why. The restaurant was a machine, and her mother was its quiet engine. Brianna watched how Diane moved through it, how she remembered every regular customer's name and their usual order, and the small facts they had mentioned in passing weeks ago. How she managed complaints without defensiveness and compliments, without vanity. How she read a table from across the room, who needed more time, who had decided, who was upset about something that had nothing to do with the food and just needed to be treated gently. There was a widower who came in every Wednesday at 11 and always sat at the same table by the window. His name was Albert, and he always ordered the same thing, vegetable soup and a roll, and he always ate alone. Brianna had watched her mother stop at his table for no more than 3 minutes each time, just long enough for Albert to laugh once, always just once, and then go back to his soup looking slightly less like a man eating alone. There was the young mother who always came in with a toddler and a look of complete exhaustion, and whom Diane always seated near the back where it was quieter, and always brought an extra napkin, and never, not once, reacted to anything the toddler knocked over. There was the table of law students who came in on Fridays to argue about their coursework, and whom Diane served without rushing, always coming back at exactly the right moment. Brianna wrote all of it down. "You're watching me," her mother said one morning, sliding into the chair across from her during a rare 10-minute break. "You told me to. I told you to see what I see." Diane poured herself a glass of water from the pitcher on the table. "Have you?" Brianna considered this. "I think I see how you run a room." "A room," Diane repeated. She was not disagreeing. She was waiting. "A network." Brianna tried. "You know things about people. You know what they need. And you give it to them before they ask." Diane drank her water. "And when you can give someone what they need before they know they need it?" "They trust you," Brianna said slowly. "Without knowing why." "Without knowing why," Diane agreed. She set her glass down. "Albert, by the window?" "Yes. He owns 2 of the buildings on 5th Street. He's been considering selling since his wife passed. 3 different developers have approached him. He hasn't decided." Diane's eyes were steady on her daughter's face. "I've been his waitress for 14 months. I know that he had a daughter he lost contact with 15 years ago. I know that what he wants more than money for those buildings is for someone to promise him they'll keep the tenants. The families who've been there for years.
She paused.
When he's ready to sell, he'll call me first. Not because of my company. Because of this. She gestured, once, at the restaurant around them. Because I sat with him in a hard week and brought him soup without making him explain why he looked like the world had weight. Brianna stared at her mother for a long, slow moment. You're not just training me to take over the business. No, Diane said. You're training me to be you. Diane looked at her daughter with an expression Brianna had seen 100 times and understood for the first time. It was not pride exactly. It was something steadier than pride. Something that had been building for 19 years and had decided, quietly, that today was a good day to be visible. I'm training you, she said, to be better. She stood, tucked her chair back in, and returned to the floor. Brianna sat very still. Then she opened her notebook to a new page and wrote at the top, in capital letters, what she actually is. She stared at the words for a while. Then she started writing everything she had seen in the past 3 weeks, everything she had not known she was absorbing, and she did not stop for an hour. The problem with Stephanie Holt was that she was not finished. This was something Brianna would come to understand later. That a person like Stephanie, shaped by 26 years of being told she was exceptional, does not simply revise herself because of one uncomfortable afternoon. The discomfort becomes something else. It gets redirected. Stephanie came back to the Golden Fork on a Tuesday. She did not bring Gabby or Trina. She came alone, which was new. She was dressed more quietly than usual, no diamond bracelet, just a plain silver watch. She asked for Diane's section. Brianna was at her corner table. She noticed immediately. She did not reach for her notebook. Diane walked to Stephanie's table and stood, notepad in hand, waiting. Stephanie looked up. For the first time in all their interactions, she seemed uncertain about where to put her face. I wanted to apologize, Stephanie said. Diane waited. What I said. The things I was unkind. I knew I was being unkind and I did it anyway, and that wasn't right. The words came out less fluently than Stephanie was accustomed to. She was used to being graceful even in difficult conversations. This was not graceful. I'm sorry. Diane regarded her for a moment. What would you like to order? Stephanie blinked. That's it? You're not going to. I appreciate the apology. Diane's voice was even. What would you like? Something moved through Stephanie's face. It might have been relief, or it might have been something harder to name. Caesar salad. Please. Diane wrote it down and left. Brianna, watching from her corner, wrote in her notebook. She didn't need the apology. She already knew it was coming. What Brianna did not write, because she did not yet know it, was what Stephanie would do 2 days later. Gabby Walsh had a social media following of 80,000 people. She called her platform a lifestyle page, though what it primarily documented was her opinion of other people's choices. She had been Stephanie's closest friend since secondary school, which meant she had a very good sense of what Stephanie was sensitive about and a very well-practiced habit of not caring. On Thursday morning, Gabby posted a video. She had filmed it in her car, casual and bright, her hair done and her sunglasses on. The kind of video that looked effortless and was not. Okay, so I need to tell you guys something that happened to a friend of mine, she began. She's going through something kind of embarrassing, and she'll probably be upset that I'm sharing this, but honestly, I think she needs to be called out. She paused for effect. So basically her mom, right? Her mom finds out that this waitress her daughter was messing with is actually like a billionaire, and now her mom is basically groveling. And my friend is mortified but also like, sweetie, you did this. You picked on someone, and turns out that someone had power. But here's my take. She leaned into the camera. Here's my take. The lesson everyone is taking from this is be careful who you mock because they might be powerful. And I think that's the wrong lesson. I think the lesson is she deserved to get caught out. Not because of the power. Because she was cruel. But now my friend is only sorry because of the power. And that's not the same thing. The video ran for 4 minutes and got 11,000 views in the first 6 hours. Brianna saw it by noon. She watched it twice. Then she called her mother. Did you see it? Yes, Diane said. Does it bother you? Diane was quiet for a moment. In the background, Brianna could hear the sound of the restaurant, the clink of dishes, the low hum of conversations, the distant sound of the kitchen. Gabby Walsh is saying something true, Diane said. She's just saying it for the wrong reasons about the wrong person in the wrong format. That doesn't make it less true. What do you mean? She's right that sorry because of power isn't the same as sorry because of wrong. She's also right that I deserved better than what Stephanie did. But she posted that video to embarrass Stephanie, not to advocate for me. Brianna said nothing. That's what I need you to see, Diane continued. People will do the right thing for the wrong reason. People will defend you to attack someone else.
That's not an ally.
That's a different kind of danger. Brianna put her phone to her chest for a moment and stared at the ceiling of her room. Then she put it back to her ear. Mom, yes. Who is my father? The pause was longer this time. Longer than Brianna expected. Longer than felt comfortable. Come to the restaurant tomorrow morning, Diane said. Early. Before opening. That's not. I know, her mother said. Come anyway. You've made it this far, which means this story already has you. The kind of person who recognizes real storytelling knows to subscribe, because the next parts of this are going to be impossible to wait for. The golden fork looked different before the customers arrived. Chairs were still upside down on the tables. The morning light came through the front windows at a low angle and lit the dust floating in the air. The kitchen was starting to warm up. Someone was already in there, clattering pans and running water, but the dining room was empty and still. Diane was sitting at a table near the window when Brianna arrived. Not a staff table. One of the customer tables. Her hands were around a mug, and she was looking out at the street, and for the first time in Brianna's memory, her mother looked not smaller, exactly. More like a person. More like someone who was also figuring things out as she went. Brianna sat across from her. They were quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that comes before something large. Your father's name, Diane said, is Carmine Duca. Brianna had the sense to stay still. Duca. Diane turned her mug slowly in her hands. That name will mean something to you when I tell you more. But I want to be careful about the order in which I tell you things, because the order matters. Okay, Brianna said carefully. Carmine is the head of the Duca family. He runs businesses, legitimate businesses, large ones, spanning 3 countries. But the Duca name is also, it carries weight in circles that don't appear in business directories. Diane paused. He is respected, feared, and he has held every agreement he has ever made for 23 years. No one who has dealt with Carmine Duca fairly has ever regretted it. And no one who has betrayed his trust has ever recovered fully. Brianna was very quiet. He and I met when I was 24 and building the early architecture of Wellspring. He was 32. We worked together on a property acquisition that both of us needed for different reasons. Diane's voice was measured. We became close. You were not planned, but wanted, by both of us. Then why? Brianna stopped. Tried again. Why didn't I know him? Because when you were 2 years old, someone inside Carmine's organization tried to use you as leverage. Diane's voice did not change. It stayed even, informational, the same voice she used to describe the daily specials. But her hands tightened almost imperceptibly around the mug. A man in his organization told a rival family that Carmine had a daughter. That daughter's location was circulated. Carmine came to me and we agreed, without anger, without a fight, that the safest thing for you was to disappear.
Completely.
So I did. You disappeared for 20 years because of that? I disappeared from his world. I built my own. Diane looked at her daughter. Wellspring was already growing, but after that, I built it specifically to be something that could never be leveraged. Something so quiet that no enemy could find a handle on it. No profile. No interviews. No association between Diane Wells, the businesswoman, and any public name or face. She picked up her mug, drank, set it down. And when you were old enough to understand, old enough to make your own choices, I would tell you. And I would let you decide. Brianna looked at her hands on the table. He's been contacting me. I know. You know. He told me he would. Diane's expression did not shift. We've been in contact for 8 months. When he found out I was bringing you to this stage, he asked if he could reach out. Brianna looked up at her mother. You could have told me sooner. I could have, Diane agreed. But then you would have come to this table wanting to talk about your father, and you would have missed everything else. Brianna thought about Albert the widower and his soup, the young mother and the extra napkin, the law students and the perfect timing. She thought about Stephanie, Holt's mother, going still at the sight of a woman in a waitress uniform. She thought about what it meant to be taught something without being taught.
What does he want? She said at last.
He wants to meet you. Diane paused. But there's something else. Something that changed 3 weeks ago, right around the time you and I started this exercise. What changed? Diane set down her mug. The man who circulated your location when you were 2 years old. His name is Bernard Locke. He left the DeLuca organization 15 years ago. He started his own firm, a real estate development company. She looked at her daughter steadily. His daughter is named Stephanie. The restaurant was very quiet.
Outside, a car passed.
The kitchen hummed. Bernard Locke, Brianna said slowly. Is Stephanie Holt's father? Holt is Miriam's surname. She kept it from a first marriage. Diane's eyes did not move from Brianna's. Stephanie's legal name is Stephanie Locke Holt. Her father, Gerald, goes by Gerald Holt in business. But his given name is Bernard Gerald Locke. A pause. And 2 months ago, his company filed for a major commercial acquisition, one that requires, as a prerequisite, a partnership with Wellspring Capital Group. Brianna stared. He came to you, she said. He came to your company, not knowing it was you. His people approached Wellspring's offices through a third-party broker. The broker doesn't know who Wellspring's founder is. Bernard does not know. Diane's voice was level. He is currently waiting for my decision. And Stephanie started coming here. Coincidence. Diane said it without any softness, without any drama. Stephanie came here because the Golden Fork is near her usual lunch spots. She didn't know this was my restaurant. She had no idea I was anything other than what she saw. She paused. But coincidences have a way of becoming meaningful if you let them develop. Brianna sat back in her chair. You've been watching all of this happen, the whole time. Yes. And you didn't stop any of it.
No. Why?
Diane considered the question the way she considered everything, with patience, with full attention, without rushing. Because I needed you to see something, she said. I needed you to watch someone who has power misuse it against someone who looks powerless. I needed you to feel what it costs the person being mocked. And I needed you to watch what happens when the truth reveals itself, not because I forced it, but because I simply waited. She stood up, picked up her mug, and began moving toward the kitchen. I also needed to know, she said without turning around, whether the woman who is going to inherit everything I've built has the patience to sit in a corner booth for 3 weeks and watch and learn without asking for explanations before she's ready to understand them. She paused at the kitchen door. You passed, she said. By the way. She went inside. Brianna sat alone in the upside-down chair restaurant, in the low morning light, and felt the shape of her life rearranging itself around her. Carmine Duca arrived in the city on a Thursday. He traveled quietly, no announcement, no entourage beyond 2 men who were very good at not being noticed. He was 61 years old, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped silver hair and hands that looked like they had done decades of work that had nothing to do with office chairs. He wore a plain charcoal jacket and dark trousers. Nothing that would attract attention. He did not go to a hotel. He went to a restaurant on the east side of the city, a small Italian place that had been open for 40 years, that his family had a long-standing but very quiet relationship with, and he sat at a table in the back and ordered espresso and waited. Brianna came in 20 minutes after he arrived. She had dressed carefully that morning. Not formally. She was not trying to impress. But she had chosen her clothes deliberately, the way her mother had taught her to choose everything. Simple, well-fitted, colors that worked together. She had her notebook in her bag. She had not decided whether that was brave or ridiculous. She saw him across the room, and he saw her, and they recognized each other the way people sometimes do when they have the same eyes. She sat down across from him. He looked at her for a long moment. Not in an uncomfortable way. In the way of someone who has been waiting a long time to look at something, and is now being careful not to look too hungrily. "You look like your mother," he said. His voice was low, with an accent that was mostly city with traces of somewhere older underneath. "I've been told that," Brianna said. "It's a compliment." "Your mother is," he stopped. Considered his next word. "Extraordinary is too small a word. I haven't found the right word in 20 years. Brianna said nothing. She watched him the way she'd been practicing, without hurry, without filling silence with noise. He smiled slightly at that.
"She taught you that?"
"She taught me a lot of things. She is the most effective teacher I have ever encountered." He turned his espresso cup once. "Did she tell you about Bernard Locke?" "Yes. He's been trying to rebuild his position for 15 years. Carmine's tone was not dramatic. It was factual, the way business was factual. "When he left my organization, he took certain information that was not his to take. Contracts, client lists, connections that belonged to others."
He paused.
"He used them to build a moderately successful real estate company. He convinced himself, over time, that what he did was simply competitive. Business. Nothing personal." Another pause. "He also convinced himself that the people he wronged either did not know or did not have the means to respond." "And do they?" Brianna said. "Have the means?" Carmine looked at his daughter. "You are sitting across from one," he said. "And you are the daughter of another." Brianna thought of Stephanie Holt and her diamond bracelet, pointing across the restaurant and laughing. She thought of Miriam Holt's hand going still on the table. She thought of her mother carrying a tray of water glasses with the steadiness of someone who had nothing to prove because she had already proved everything. "What happens now?" she asked. "That," said Carmine Duca, "depends on your mother. It has always depended on your mother." Something moved in his expression, respect, and underneath that something older and less composed. "She controls the timing. She always has." Brianna looked at her hands. "She said you'd say that." He laughed, a surprised laugh, genuine and brief. "Of course she did." The call came to Bernard Locke's office on a Friday afternoon. It was placed through Wellspring Capital Group's external liaison line, a line that very few people had access to, which was in itself a message. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and female. "Mr. Holt, Wellspring will be reviewing your acquisition proposal personally. The founder would like to arrange a meeting. Next Tuesday, 10 a.m. The Golden Fork Restaurant." Bernard Locke, who had for 15 years gone entirely by Gerald Holt, who had built a new identity around a borrowed surname and a careful distance from his own past, sat very still at his desk. "The Golden Fork," he repeated.
"Yes."
"Is Tuesday convenient?" Yes. Tuesday is fine." He put down the phone and sat for a long time. He had eaten at the Golden Fork. His wife had mentioned it several times. His daughter had. He picked up his phone and called Miriam. "The Wellspring meeting," he said when she answered. "They want to meet at the Golden Fork." There was a pause on Miriam's end. A pause he did not understand, but felt the weight of.
"Miriam,
do you know something about this?" Another pause. "Gerald," his wife said, and her voice had the quality of someone standing on unsteady ground and trying not to show it. "I think you need to talk to Stephanie before Tuesday." Sunday dinner at the Holt house had always been a formal affair. Linen tablecloth, the good china, Gerald at the head, Miriam at the foot, Stephanie on one side looking at her phone until her father asked her not to. It was a ritual that had continued through Stephanie's childhood, through her years at university, through her 26th year, unchanged and unchanging, a steady proof that the family was, whatever else it might be, intact. This Sunday was different. Stephanie could feel it from the moment she arrived. Her father was already at the table when she walked in, which never happened. He was always the last one down. His wine glass was full and untouched. Her mother was bringing dishes from the kitchen with a focused energy that looked like movement for the sake of movement. They sat.
They served themselves.
And then Gerald Holt set down his fork. "I need to tell you something," he said. Both of you. Stephanie looked at her mother. Her mother looked at the tablecloth. My name, Gerald said, is not Gerald Holt. The dinner table was very quiet. My name, my legal name, the name I was born with, is Bernard Gerald Locke. I changed it when I was 38. When I started over. He picked up his wine glass, looked at it, put it back down. I worked for a man named Carmine Duca for 9 years. I was part of his organization in a capacity that I have not been fully honest with either of you about. He looked at Stephanie, then at Miriam. Miriam knew the broad strokes when we married. She did not know all of it. Stephanie said, "What is the DeLuca organization?" Her father's jaw worked for a moment. It is a family. A very old, very powerful Italian family with business interests in real estate, logistics, private equity, and other areas that are harder to categorize legally. He said it carefully. Carmine Duca is respected and feared in equal measure. He is not, to my knowledge, engaged in anything that could be conclusively connected to criminal activity. But the family's history, he stopped. The family's history is complicated. You said you started over, Stephanie said. What did you start over from? Her father was quiet for a moment. I made a mistake. When I left the DeLuca organization, I took certain things that weren't mine. Information. Client relationships. The foundation of what became Holt Property Group. He did not look away from his daughter. I told myself it was compensation. 4 years of service. For things I had given them that they never fully acknowledged. A pause. I was wrong. What I did was wrong. I have known it for 15 years and I chose, instead of correcting it, to simply go far enough away that it didn't catch up. Stephanie stared at her father. This was the man who had taught her that she was exceptional, who had told her in 100 small ways that the world was arranged for people like them, who had sat in this chair, at this table, under these lights, and been solid, knowable. Sure. Does he know? She asked. DeLuca. Does he know where you are? He has always known where I am, her father said, without any drama, without any armor. He is not a man who loses track of things. He folded his hands on the table. The Wellspring meeting on Tuesday, Wellspring Capital Group, is his. Connected to him, at minimum. Possibly more directly than I know. Connected to who? Stephanie said. Carmine Duca? I believe so. Yes. Stephanie thought about Miriam going still at the restaurant. About Miriam saying Diane Wells in that specific, careful, frightened voice. The waitress, Stephanie said slowly.
Mom.
The waitress. You recognized her. That day we had lunch. She looked at her mother. You knew who she was. Miriam's hands on the table were not steady. I had met her once. Briefly. Years ago. Before your father left the organization. She and Carmine were, she stopped. She's connected to Carmine Duca, Stephanie said. Not a question. Her mother said nothing. The waitress I called a ship. Stephanie's voice had gone very flat. The woman I left a 37-cent tip and a note about diets. She looked at her father. She's connected to the man whose organization you betrayed. Gerald Holt. Bernard Locke said nothing. Stephanie put her fork down. She pushed her chair back. She stood up. I need to go somewhere, she said. Stephanie. I'm not leaving. I'll be back. She looked at her father. But I need an hour. She got in her car and drove without deciding where she was going, and ended up parked outside the Golden Fork at 8:30 on a Sunday evening, the restaurant closed and dark, looking at her own reflection in the window and thinking about the things she had done in that room, and what she actually owed, and to whom and why. She had apologized to Diane Wells for being cruel. She had not known, at the time, the full architecture of what she was apologizing for. She had thought she was apologizing for bad manners. She was beginning to understand that it went considerably deeper. She did not go inside. The restaurant was closed. But she sat there for an hour. And when she drove home, she was not the same person who had driven away. Brianna met her mother at the restaurant on Monday morning, the day before the meeting, and her mother was not in her waitress uniform. Diane Wells was dressed in a steel gray suit that fit her with the quiet precision of something made specifically for her body. Her hair was down. She wore simple gold earrings and a watch that was not showy, but if you knew what to look for, said everything. She looked like exactly what she was, which, Brianna was realizing, was something her mother could choose to reveal or conceal entirely at will. Brianna stopped in the doorway. "You look different," she said. "I look the same." Diane picked up a folder from the table. "You're just seeing it now." Brianna came fully inside. "What happens tomorrow?" "Bernard Locke will arrive. He will walk into this restaurant expecting to meet a Wellspring representative. He will sit down, and I will walk out of the kitchen, and he will see me, and he will understand." Diane spoke without theatrics, without visible emotion. "Miriam Holt will be with him. She insisted on accompanying him when she heard the venue. I believe she hopes to smooth things, explain, perhaps even protect him, though I'm not entirely sure from what, because what is happening tomorrow is not punishment." "What is it?" "It is accountability, done in the most civil, professional, documented way possible." Diane put the folder down. Wellspring has prepared a full record of the intellectual and professional property that Bernard Locke removed when he left, the contracts, the client relationships, the specific network connections that formed the foundation of what became Holt Property Group. Our legal team has spent 3 months documenting it. Tomorrow, Bernard will be given a choice. What choice? He can acknowledge the debt, formally, legally, and negotiate repayment terms that will allow his company to continue operating. Or he can dispute it, in which case we pursue it through formal channels, which will result in a level of disclosure that will be very uncomfortable for Holt Property Group and for his family. Diane paused. "I prefer the first option. I have no interest in destroying what he built, only in acknowledging what it was built on." Brianna was quiet for a moment. "And Stephanie?" Diane looked at her daughter. "What about Stephanie?" She didn't know any of this. About her father. She was cruel to us, but she was cruel the way someone is cruel when they've never been told there's a consequence to it. She didn't know the full story. "No," Diane agreed. "Are you going to tell her?" "I am going to let Tuesday be Tuesday." Diane straightened. "What she does with what she learns, that's hers to decide. I'm not responsible for her choices after she has the information she needs. Only before."
Brianna thought about this.
"You're not angry." "I was angry once," Diane said. "A long time ago. About a lot of things. I decided that anger was a fuel I could either waste or use. I chose to use it." She looked around the restaurant, the clean tables, the upright chairs, the morning light coming through the windows. All of this is what anger looks like when it becomes something useful. She walked toward the kitchen. "Get some rest tonight," she said over her shoulder. "Tomorrow, I need you here. Watching. Not from the corner this time." "Where, then?" Diane paused at the kitchen door. "At my table," she said. Tuesday arrived. The golden fork opened at 8 and operated normally through the morning rush. Diane was in the kitchen, not as a waitress, not today, reviewing documents with 2 members of her legal team who had arrived at 7:30 and set up discreetly in the back office. At 9:50, Brianna arrived. She was dressed in dark trousers and a crisp white blouse. Her hair was down. She sat at a table near the center of the room, not the corner as promised, and ordered tea. At 9:58, Carmine Duca walked in. He sat down across from Brianna, and they did not speak immediately, the comfortable quiet of 2 people still learning the sound of each other. He ordered coffee. He straightened the napkin on the table with the deliberate precision of a man who noticed when things were not aligned. "Are you nervous?" he asked after a moment. "A little," Brianna said. "But not about today." He looked at her. "What then?" "About what comes after." She held her tea with both hands. "Today is one thing. But after today, the company is going to start moving toward a transition. And I don't know if she stopped. "My mother said I passed, whatever the test was. But passing a test and being ready aren't always the same thing." Carmine was quiet for a moment. "Do you know what I believed when I was your age? About power?"
"What?"
"That it was something you acquired." He turned his coffee cup once. "Built up, accumulated, stored. That the person with the most of it was the most protected." He paused. "Your mother taught me over many years, and without ever directly saying it, that power which is only accumulated collapses under its own weight. The people who actually last, are the ones who know what their power is for. Brianna thought about Albert's soup, about the young mother and the extra napkin, about her mother in her waitress uniform carrying a tray with perfect balance. She uses it for people, Brianna said. She uses it, Carmine said, to make the world behave the way it should already. When it doesn't, she corrects it. Quietly, precisely, and without making herself the story. He looked at his daughter. That is harder than it sounds. Much harder. At 10:03, the door opened. Bernard Locke walked in first. He was 64, trimmer than he had once been, in a navy suit that was trying slightly too hard to be understated. Behind him came Miriam, in a beige blazer, her pearls, her posture. Her eyes swept the room and found Carmine Duca, and she did not visibly react. She was too well trained for that, but she touched her husband's arm. Bernard saw Carmine. He stopped walking. The two men looked at each other across the restaurant floor, and something passed between them that had the weight of 15 years and several kinds of wrong. The kitchen door swung open. Diane Wells walked out. She was in the gray suit, the earrings, the watch. She carried a single folder, which she held at her side, and she walked toward the center of the room without hurrying, and she looked not like the woman who had taken Stephanie Holt's Caesar salad order, though she was that woman. She looked like the weight of the room had quietly rearranged itself around her the moment she appeared. Miriam Holt made a sound, very small. And then, slowly, with the full weight of comprehension, with the understanding of who this woman was and what she had built and what it meant that she was standing here, now, in this specific room, Miriam Holt's knees bent. She lowered herself, right there on the tile floor of the Golden Fork restaurant, in her beige blazer and her pearls, and she knelt. Her husband stared at her. Miriam. We wronged this woman, Miriam said. Her voice was controlled, but barely. Gerald. Bernard. We wronged her. And we wronged her daughter. And I am not going to stand here and pretend that an apology in a business meeting is sufficient. She looked up at Diane. I am sorry for everything Stephanie did in this room, not knowing who you were. And I am sorry for who her father is and what he took from you. And I am sorry that we have been too afraid for too long to say that directly. The restaurant was perfectly silent. Diane looked down at Miriam for a moment. Then she extended one hand. Stand up, Miriam, she said. Her voice was quiet, not unkind. I don't need that from you. I need your husband at the table. This is where the story will turn a corner that no one in that room, and no one watching, expected. This is the moment you do not want to leave. Subscribe and hit the notification button right now, because what Diane says next at that table is the last thing any of them expected to hear. The table was round. 4 chairs. Diane sat. Bernard sat across from her, still pale, still processing. Miriam took the seat beside her husband. Carmine was on Diane's left. Brianna sat slightly apart, not at the table, but near enough. Watching. Learning. The way her mother had always intended. Diane placed the folder on the table and did not open it. I'm not going to spend the next hour reviewing every document in this folder, she said. You know what's in it. Your attorneys have already been informed that it exists. The documentation is complete and it has been verified by 3 independent parties. She looked at Bernard directly, calmly, the way she looked at everyone. What I want to talk about first is not the business. Bernard was very still. When you circulated my daughter's location, Diane said, she was 2 years old. She didn't know her own name yet. She didn't know what danger was. She knew me and she knew this. She touched the table lightly. The world being solid under her. That's all she knew. A pause. And you used her as a piece in something she had no part in. Because you were angry with Carmine. Because you wanted leverage and she was available. Bernard said nothing. He had the look of a man confronting something he had succeeded, for 15 years, in keeping just far enough away to be theoretical. I do not want her company, Diane said. I do not want her clients, your reputation, or your family's peace of mind. I don't want Stephanie to lose her inheritance. I don't want your wife to suffer for choices she didn't make. She folded her hands on the table. What I want is for you to formally acknowledge what happened. In writing, with your signature. Witnessed. She touched the folder. And then I want you to hear the terms I'm prepared to offer, which are more generous than you deserve and which I'm offering anyway, because I prefer the world to be built on honesty than on either forgiveness or punishment. Bernard swallowed. What are the terms? 20% of Holt Property Group's annual revenue for 7 years, paid directly into a trust that I will use to fund business education programs for young women from underprivileged backgrounds. Structured through Wellspring. Fully documented. Public.
She paused.
After 7 years, the debt is considered settled. Wellspring will refer 2 significant clients per year to Holt Property Group for the same 7-year period. You will not lose ground. You will, in fact, gain some. Bernard stared. Why would you? Because I am not interested in destruction, Diane said. I never was. I built Wellspring to create things, not end them. She looked at him with an expression that was not warm and was not cold. It was precise, like a measurement. But you need to understand clearly what happened. You need to know that I know. Your daughter needs to know the full truth. And the debt needs to be visible, not hidden, not settled quietly in a back room. She opened the folder and slid the top document across the table. Sign there. Bernard looked at the paper for a long time. Carmine, beside Diane, said nothing. He had not spoken since sitting down. He did not need to. His presence in the room was a language of its own. Bernard Locke picked up the pen.
He signed.
Stephanie arrived at 11:15. She had not been invited to the 10 o'clock meeting. She had come anyway, which said something about her, something that was, for the first time, in the right direction. She pushed open the door of the Golden Fork and saw the table. Her mother. Her father. Carmine Duca, whom she recognized from her father's reaction more than from any name or face she had previously known.
And Diane.
And near the wall, Brianna, watching with the steady attention of someone who had been practicing it for weeks. Stephanie stopped. Her father looked at her.
Dad, she said.
I know. Bernard closed his eyes briefly. How much? Enough. She came further into the room. She was not performing composure. It was just there, somewhere she had not expected to find it. You should have told us. Yes, he said. I should have. Stephanie turned to Diane. She had looked at this woman many times, with dismissal, with mockery, with belated embarrassment, with a too-late apology. This was the first time she had looked at her with full information, and she had the humility, barely, to let it show on her face. I didn't know who you were when she stopped. That's not an excuse. I know. I'm not trying to excuse it. She straightened. I was cruel. Not to a waitress. To a person. And the fact that you turned out to be someone I had additional reasons to be sorry in front of doesn't make what I did to a person in a service role any worse than it already was. Diane looked at her. That's a perceptive distinction, she said. I'm working on being perceptive. Stephanie's voice wobbled slightly on the last word. She controlled it. I also came because I owe your daughter an apology. If she's willing to hear it. Brianna was watching from her table near the wall. Their eyes met across the room. Brianna stood up and walked over. She stopped a few feet from Stephanie, far enough to be choosing the distance deliberately, close enough to mean something. I heard you, Brianna said. I've been hearing everything. For weeks.
She paused.
You hurt my mother. You hurt me, actually. I was in this restaurant every day at that corner table. You said some of those things when I was 10 feet away. Stephanie flinched. A real flinch. I didn't know. I know you didn't. That's part of the problem. Brianna's voice was steady, the product of 19 years of watching her mother be steady. You didn't look. You didn't notice who was in the room. You said what you wanted to say because you assumed no one in that section of the restaurant mattered enough for it to cost you anything.
She paused.
But everyone in any room is someone. And not because they might be powerful, just because they're a person. Stephanie nodded.
Once.
Small and real. I hear you, she said. Good. Brianna looked at her for a moment longer. The apology is accepted. Not forgotten. But accepted. She walked back to her table. She sat down. She opened her notebook. Stephanie stood for a moment in the middle of the restaurant, then sat at an empty table near the door and was quiet. The documents were finalized before noon. Bernard and Miriam left first. He shook Carmine's hand at the door, the complicated handshake of men with a long history that had no clean ending, only a renegotiated middle. Miriam, passing Diane, stopped. Your daughter, Miriam said quietly, is going to be extraordinary.
She already is, Diane said.
After the Holts left, it was just Diane, Carmine, and Brianna in the restaurant, plus the lunch rush beginning to build outside, the sound of the city returning around them. Carmine looked at Diane across the table where the signed document sat. You could have asked for more, he said. I know. You could have leveled his company. It would have been fully justified. I know. Why didn't you? Diane considered this. She touched the edge of the folder. Because Stephanie didn't know. Because Miriam didn't choose. Because there are employees at Holt Property Group who go home to families who have nothing to do with Bernard Locke's choices. She paused. And because every time I have made a decision from anger rather than from purpose, I have regretted it. This was a decision from purpose. She looked at him. The purpose was for Bernard to see clearly, to acknowledge, to contribute going forward to something that repairs what he helped damage. She paused. The purpose was also for Brianna to watch every part of it. They both turned and Brianna, at her table, looked up from her notebook. What are you writing? Her father asked. Brianna looked at the page. Everything, she said. He smiled. Good. Diane stood, straightened the documents, and picked up the folder. There's something else, she said. She set the folder down and looked at both of them. I've been thinking about the transition timeline. I had planned 3 years. A slow handover, phase by phase. And now? Carmine asked. Now I'm thinking 18 months. She looked at Brianna. You're ready faster than I planned for. Which, a pause. The closest thing to sentimentality Diane Wells allowed herself in public. Which doesn't surprise me. But it is accelerating some things. What things? Brianna asked. The public announcement of Wellspring's leadership transition. Diane sat back down. We will announce that the company is moving to a new managing director. Your name will be public for the first time. And I, for the first time in 11 years, will give an interview. She said it the way someone says something they have decided and are not going to unmake. It's time. Brianna looked at her mother. You said you stayed invisible to protect me. You were too, Diane said. You're 19 now. You are your father's daughter. You are my daughter. And you are the person who sat in a corner booth for 3 weeks and watched and understood, and who looked a person in the eye who had hurt her and said the apology is accepted but not forgotten. Diane's voice stayed even, stayed level, stayed warm in the particular way that warm and level can coexist when you have been practicing it for 2 decades. You don't need to hide anymore. And neither do I. Brianna sat with that for a long moment. What about Stephanie? She asked. Diane raised an eyebrow. I mean, she has a lot to sort out. Her father's real name. Her father's history. The fact that the woman she mocked in a restaurant was all of this. Brianna paused. I think she's actually trying. I think she might be worth, I don't know, worth watching. Diane was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do? I want to offer her an internship. Both Diane and Carmine went very still. At Wellspring? Diane asked. Not immediately. Not until the public announcement. But, yes. She came here today, when she didn't have to. She said what she said without making excuses. And she has a real estate background, and her father's company has connections that will become available in 7 years anyway under the agreement. And Brianna stopped. And I think watching someone rebuild from a mistake is educational. For both of us. Diane looked at her daughter for a long time. Carmine said nothing. He was watching Diane's face. She hurt you, Diane said finally.
She did.
And I told her that. Clearly. Brianna looked at her notebook, then at her mother. You've spent 20 years turning something that wronged you into something that builds people up. I'm 19. I'd like to start a little earlier than that. The restaurant was quiet. Outside, the lunch crowd was filling the sidewalk. The golden fork was beginning to fill up too, the daily regulars coming through the door, the familiar sound of the room coming alive around them. Albert the widower arrived at his usual table by the window.
He sat down.
He looked around for someone, and when Diane caught his eye from across the room, he smiled. Diane smiled back. She turned to Brianna. "One internship," she said. 12 weeks. She earns nothing until she proves she can do the work. And she starts at the bottom. "Of course," Brianna said. "The very bottom." "Obviously." Diane stood. She straightened her jacket, picked up the folder, and looked at her daughter and the man across the table from her daughter with the composed, settled expression of a woman who has always known how the room would end up, has simply been patient enough to let it arrive. "I have a business to run," she said. "And I believe—" She looked at Carmine, with something in her eyes that was private and not for the restaurant or the documents or the moment, only for him. "We have a dinner to rearrange for this week. Since we're all here." Carmine stood. "Thursday." "Thursday," she agreed. She walked back toward the kitchen. Not the walk of a waitress, not the walk of a CEO, just the walk of a woman completely at home in her own life, in her own decisions, in the life she had built grain by grain over 20 years of wearing the right shoes for every room and never once needing anyone to announce who she was. Brianna watched her go. Then she opened her notebook to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote, "Day 1. She thought for a moment. Then, underneath, "Actually, day 22. But the first day of the next part." She capped her pen. She looked at her father, who was looking at the kitchen door with an expression that had been building for 20 years and had finally, quietly, been allowed to land. "She's incredible," Brianna said. "Yes," said Carmine Duca. "She is." Outside the Golden Fork, the city moved the way cities do, without caring what had just happened inside, without knowing that a woman had knelt on a tile floor, and a daughter had accepted an apology, and a father had signed his name to the truth, and another man had crossed a restaurant to meet the child his choices had nearly cost him. The city moved, and the lunch crowd moved, and Albert the widower ate his vegetable soup by the window, and the young mother settled her toddler into a chair in the back, and the law students argued happily at their Friday table even though it was Tuesday, because they had gotten the day wrong, and the staff had not corrected them. The world was ordinary on the outside. It usually is. Stephanie Holt sat at her table near the door for another 20 minutes after everyone else had moved. She was not on her phone. She was not looking at anything in particular. She was simply sitting, being someone who had learned something she could not unlearn and was taking the time to decide what that meant for the next step. At some point, Brianna walked past her table on the way to refill her tea. She stopped. "You can tell your father," Brianna said, "that the offer I mentioned, he'll hear about it through the proper channels. But he should know it's coming." Stephanie looked up. "What offer?" "A 12-week opportunity." Brianna looked at her steadily. "To start over. Correctly." She walked away. Stephanie sat for a moment. Then she took out her phone. Not for social media. Not for anything public. She opened her notes app and typed 4 words. "Figure out who you are."
She stared at it.
Then she added 3 more. "And then be that." She put her phone away. She stood up. She left a tip, a real one, the kind that said she had been paying attention finally, and she walked out into the ordinary city that did not know what had just been rearranged inside the Golden Fork. Some people go through life not knowing how much they are worth. Some people spend their whole lives mocking the very hands that could have lifted them because they couldn't see past the uniform, past the shoes, past the quiet exterior of someone who had decided, long ago, that power does not need to be loud to be real. Diane Wells wore worn-out shoes and carried a tray and let the world misread her for years, not because she was afraid, but because she was preparing. And when the moment came, she did not raise her voice. She did not make a scene. She simply walked out of a kitchen in a gray suit and let the truth speak with the weight of 20 years behind it. If this story moved something in you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the quietest person in the room sometimes built the room. And that every single person carrying a tray, or a mop, or a lunchbox deserves to be seen as exactly what they are, a whole, complete, irreplaceable human being with a story you probably haven't heard yet.